Welcome, brave souls. Tonight we unravel the dark tale of the cursed clock, a legacy of shadows, a timepiece that binds restless spirits. Will you dare to hear its secrets? Beware, for the clock ticks backward, drawing you closer to the abyss. Listen closely. The hour is near.
When my estranged uncle passed away, I inherited his old Victorian home. The house was as eerie as the stories surrounding it, but what caught my eye was a large, ornate clock in the living room. Its pendulum swung silently, yet it exuded an unsettling presence. The clock was a family heirloom, or so I was told. My uncle often claimed it was cursed, but he was known for his wild tales. It was a beautiful piece, carved with intricate designs, though the ominous aura it emitted made me question its history. On the first night in the house, the clock began to chime at midnight. Its sound was deafening, echoing through the empty halls. Oddly, it hadn't been wound. The chimes grew louder, filling the air with an oppressive weight. Each chime seemed to drag time itself into a standstill. I watched in horror as the hands of the clock spun backward briefly before halting. The house felt alive, as if something unseen was stirring within its walls. I attempted to stop the clock, but the hands wouldn't budge. As I touched it, a chill ran through me, and for a brief moment I saw shadowy figures reflected in the glass. My heart raced as the room seemed to darken. I spent the rest of the night sleepless, the clock's silent swing haunting my thoughts. The next morning I called my friend Eric, who had a knack for researching the paranormal. He agreed to come over and take a look. As Eric arrived, the air grew heavier. He examined the clock and immediately noticed the strange symbols etched into the wood. "These markings are ancient," he said. "They're used to bind spirits. Your uncle wasn't lying about the curse." That night the whispers began. At first they were faint, like the rustling of leaves. But as the clock struck midnight, they grew louder, more coherent. Voices of men and women, pleading, crying, filled the room. Eric and I sat in the dim light, trying to make sense of the voices. One name repeated over and over: Nathaniel. Eric suggested it might be the spirit bound to the clock. His research indicated that Nathaniel was executed unjustly centuries ago. We decided to record the sounds. The playback revealed more than we could hear with our ears alone. Distorted cries and chilling laughter echoed from the device. Eric theorized the clock was a conduit for trapped souls. Curiosity turned to dread as we noticed the shadows on the walls began to move independently. They writhed and shifted, growing taller, more menacing. One shadow resembled a cloaked figure pointing directly at the clock. I tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't budge. The air turned icy and my breath formed misty clouds. Eric frantically searched his notes, mumbling about a ritual to break the connection between the clock and the spirits. Suddenly, the cloaked shadow lunged toward us. I felt an intense pressure on my chest, as if unseen hands were trying to crush my heart. Eric shouted, "It's trying to keep us here." In a desperate attempt, Eric threw salt around the room, momentarily dispersing the shadows. The whispers subsided, and the door finally creaked open. We fled, vowing to uncover the truth behind the cursed clock. The next day, Eric returned with a ritual meant to sever the clock's connection to the spiritual realm. It required rare ingredients and specific chants. We gathered everything and prepared for the midnight ceremony. As the hour approached, the house felt more oppressive than ever. The air was thick and the walls seemed to pulse. We positioned the items around the clock, each step guided by ancient texts. At the first chime of midnight, Eric began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The room trembled, and the shadows returned, more aggressive this time. They circled us, their movements synchronized with the clock's pendulum. The chants seemed to anger the spirits. The clock's hands spun wildly, and its face cracked, revealing a dark, swirling void. I could see glimpses of tortured souls within, their hollow eyes pleading for release. Eric shouted for me to hold the clock steady. As I did, it felt as if the void within was trying to pull me in. I clung tightly, reciting the final words of the ritual alongside Eric, hoping it would be enough. With a blinding flash, the void within the clock erupted, and the room was filled with an ear-splitting wail. The shadows convulsed and then evaporated, leaving behind only silence. The clock was shattered, its curse seemingly broken. We slumped to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Eric inspected the remnants of the clock and nodded. "It's over," he said. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had merely scratched the surface of something far darker. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes around the house. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, hidden just out of sight. Eric suggested I sell the house and leave, but I was determined to stay. I needed answers. I sifted through my uncle's belongings, hoping to find more clues about the clock and its dark origins. Among his papers, I discovered an old journal. The entries were cryptic, detailing a secret society that used the clock and rituals to communicate with the dead. My uncle had tried to destroy it but failed, leaving me to face its curse. That night I heard the whispers again, faint but unmistakable. The shattered clock was gone, yet its presence lingered. I realized the ritual hadn't destroyed the curse. It had merely dispersed it, spreading its reach throughout the house. Determined to end this once and for all, I contacted an expert in paranormal artifacts. Dr. Langley was skeptical at first, but agreed to visit. He examined the remnants of the clock and confirmed my worst fears. The curse was evolving. Dr. Langley explained that the clock had been a vessel for powerful spirits. Without it, they were free to roam. To contain them, we needed to reconstruct the clock and perform a final binding ritual. It was a dangerous gamble. As we prepared for the ritual, the house began to fight back. Objects moved on their own, lights flickered, and the whispers grew louder. Time was running out, and the spirits were growing stronger with each passing moment. At midnight, we began the binding ritual. The reconstructed clock stood at the center of the room, its cracked face glowing faintly. Dr. Langley chanted while I kept the protective circle intact with salt and candles. The room shook violently and the shadows returned, more malevolent than ever. They clawed at the circle, trying to break through. One of them, larger and more defined, stood just beyond the edge, watching me with hollow eyes. As the ritual intensified, the clock's hands began to move again, spinning wildly. The void within the clock reopened, but this time, it pulled the shadows toward it. The spirits screamed, their forms stretching as they were dragged back inside. Suddenly, the largest shadow stepped into the circle, shattering the salt line. It lunged at me, its icy grip wrapping around my throat. Dr. Langley shouted for me to hold on as he recited the final words of the ritual. With a final chant, the clock emitted a blinding light, and the shadow released me. The spirits were drawn into the void, their screams echoing until the clock's face sealed shut. The hand stopped and silence fell once more. The ritual had worked, but at a cost. The clock was now a permanent prison for the spirits, and Dr. Langley warned that it must never be destroyed or opened again. We buried it deep in the woods, far from any living soul. Though the house was finally free, the experience left scars that would never heal. I sold the property and moved on, but even now I sometimes wake in the dead of night, hearing the faint chime of a cursed clock in the distance.
The story may have ended, but nightmares have a way of clinging to you, following you into the dark. Tonight, when the shadows lengthen and you feel that creeping dread, remember, some nightmares don't end when you wake up. If this story left you uneasy and you crave more terror, hit the like and subscribe button. The real nightmare is only just beginning.